Okay, hello, hello, hello to everybody out there listening and watching us. Welcome to Melanin and Moonlight. I am one of your co-hosts, Tyrell Collins.
I'm the other Vernon Scott, and welcome to the show. How are you doing today, Tyrell?
I am doing good. We in the midst of summer, and I see, I went walking today, and I'm just seeing all the hot glistening bodies everywhere. I mean,
Ooh.
let me say, even though obviously I am an SGL man, like the women out here are bodying.
Yes,
They are bodying. So,
summertime.
it's summertime. So, it's like it's all love. It's all love. And then of course, men got the shirts out, they glistered, the skin is popping, it's glowing. As a melanated people, we are just so beautiful.
We
Our
are.
beauty just can't it can't be denied.
I love looking at us. It's just like I see myself in you, and I know I look
You.
beautiful. You look beautiful. Oh my God, look at us!
I know, right? It's like looking in the mirror.
Right.
Aspiration. Hashtag aspiration.
Listen, I think it was a couple days ago. This happens more often than not, but I just looked in the mirror. I was like, "Oh, is that you? What? Hold up. What, why
Yeah.
you looking cute today? Like you're
No.
giving masculinity. You're giving
Yes. I am
femininity.
a
You're giving."
I am an ultimate fan of teen moments. I'm like every time you pass the mirror, you should just go ting.
Listen, listen.
Everybody, we all need our teen moments.
Like, did you decide to wake up this cute this morning? Like, you didn't put me on the routine of how I'm going to perceive myself today, and now I have to perceive
Yeah.
myself perceiving me looking good. Oh my God. Too much
Yeah.
happening in this moment.
Yeah. All day. All day.
But before we even get into the things, I just have to remind people it is hot outside, okay? It is hot
Yeah.
outside. Stay indoors.
Disclaimer: stay inside if you can, but if you must go outside, make sure y'all drinking y'all water, y'all.
Yes, yes, that part.
Make sure you get yourself some Gatorade, electrolytes. Make sure you keeping, like your electrolytes up. Like people don't be going out here and falling out. We don't need nobody falling out. We don't want to hear
At
that.
all. Like it is crazy. The weather conditions are out of control. That thing that happened in Texas this weekend, it's just
Mhm.
sadness. It's just happiness. It's hot. It's too much. Anger's up.
Yeah.
Frustration is up. And we all need to cool down. And I cannot wait for winter to start coming around, minus the
Oh,
hurricane season, because I'm not trying to deal with any of them this year.
yeah.
But like cool air, find us soon because we're not in the hottest months yet. Which
Mhm.
will start off in August and then
Yeah.
September, especially here in Georgia. But August is our hot month, okay? But ugh, if this is what hot is already and it's only July, I don't want to see what August
Yeah.
got to offer.
Well, that's why I'm glad I'm moving midway through.
Oh yeah.
No. Yeah, y'all out here, I am moving. I ain't telling y'all where I'm moving, but I am moving, so I'm about to be out of high Georgia.
Love that for you. Well, I still have my year and a half before I go to my out of the country areas that cannot wait. Anyway, so today the thing that's on my radar is TMZ, Shade Room, two
Mm.
places of many that forever gets on my nerves because like I'm mostly tired of the perceptions that they put out there. Like people have the
Mhm.
sense that they're very black-centric places, that they're going to be reporting the facts, and people forget that they started off as just gossip
Mm.
tabloids. And
Right.
the social media, well, outside of TMZ had like the other stuff going on where they, broke important stories, especially in the Me Too era. And they got even more of a push, but the Shade Room was essentially an Instagram
Hmm.
profile that just went out of control after that. But the thing that frustrates me so much is the level of misinformation and anti-blackness that come out of these sources these days. like the because we're going to go into it in a second, but like with the stuff with the Diddy trial being the
Mhm.
first ones to push out misinformation or to start narratives that re-traumatizes and re-victimizes Cassie, Jane Doe, MIA or Maya, Mia, whatever her name was, that was in the trial too,
Mhm.
making jokes about the abuse that the women and men faced as it related to Diddy, as well as these avenues of these places in terms of like political leanings where they are so ready to make arguments that degrade the Black identity or push narratives that further divide us rather than bringing us together. Like, especially
Yeah.
the anti-trans, anti-Black trans rhetoric that you see on some of their pages, where they will talk about, like, they do be trying to go in on T.S. Madison every now and again, but they'll bring up a hot piece story that's related to the queer community, like I remember some time ago, the rapper Chica, she mentioned how people should be, women specifically, should be a little bit more open to dating bisexual men, and really gave an educated perspective of why she is saying that. And they're framing it as the Black women should not have to engage with gay men as though bisexuality doesn't exist, or lean towards the idea that homosexual, just because a person is bi, they're more
Mhm.
likely to be carrying some type of disease, which is not true. And anybody who knows people of the queer community know that queer people get tested on a very regular basis.
Mhm.
Sexual health is at the forefront and has been pushed to queer people, especially Black queer people, for the vast majority of our lives. So, yeah, we'll be more likely to be up to date on what's going on in our sexual health than someone who's heterosexual. So, like,
Right.
all of this, Discord or all of the discourse, all this stuff that's going on that they push out there has just never sat right with me, because you know that your following is predominantly Black and you're not doing anything to push us forward, but do everything possible to keep us back or to keep us focused on things that don't matter when there's so many
Mhm.
more pressing issues that we can turn our attentions to.
Yeah. And even just the way that I think about like the way TMZ goes about certain things. So,
Mhm.
like for anybody that doesn't know, TMZ obviously news source was not actually really like a thing until around 2005. So, we're talking about like 20 years now. And
Mhm.
if you think about the fact that it was founded by Harvey Levin and I believe his name is Jim Patator, they are, obviously white men, own media brands. I mean, that's nothing new. But I mean, of course, they are, TMZ has been known for breaking like very high profile stories. So anything that comes from like the, Rihanna situation, obviously that happened with Chris Brown, the deaths of like Brittany Murphy and Kobe Bryant and Michael Jackson and, things like that. But it's kind of like the way I've always seen TMZ is like they leverage connections, especially with law enforcement, hospital staff, and airport workers to obtain information in ethically murky ways. And so, like, one of the things that has all, well, a couple of things that have always, kind of stood out to me about them is like when they have, like reported on like certain people's deaths. Like for instance, I distinctly remember they actually reported on Kobe Bryant's death before the family was informed.
Mhm.
And I'm
Mhm.
like, that to me was just really gross.
Mhm.
So when we talk about like, this relationship that is, pretty much in tune with the Black community. It's exploitative in a lot of ways. They're quick to publicize mugshots, 911 calls, leaked footage, and yeah, and these kind of things, yeah, they do come out eventually, but it's kind of like TMZ is not necessarily like your reputable news source. It's like where you go to get like that quick fact information because you know that TMZ is going to come out with it first. So
Hmm.
there's little, I guess the way I would coin it is like there's little very cultural care for
Hmm.
how they handle a lot of things.
Yeah.
So it really is not about reporting on culture or Black culture. It's like a lot of times, no, they're in the nature of like exploiting, making things a Black spectacle,
Hmm. And
so.
and the other thing is that they lack follow through. Like they will
Mm,
put something out there and they don't follow up on the story. They don't correct their narratives, especially if they got something wrong. Like to go back to the Kobe example, I
mm,
remember when all of that came out, and there were people online who was already saying this is very distasteful, and people didn't get to that point until they found out that Kobe's wife didn't know about his passing until she saw the TMZ information. So that means they didn't reach out to her. They didn't allow the proper procedures to go the way that they need to, be it law enforcement, let her know, coroners, whoever it is that reaches out to the family. They didn't even allow that to properly be handled the way that they needed it to before um, they put out their article, and they didn't
mm,
necessarily issue an apology or anything like that.
yeah,
It was just more, oh yeah, we put it out there. Oh well, now y'all are unhappy. Like, okay,
yeah,
we're going to still be reporting. And I'm like, no, there's like, can we have some decorum? Can we have some respect
exactly.
about the people that you're reporting on? Like even when it comes to something more recent with the young man, I forget his name. His name sounds like it's a basketball player. Uh,
Mm,
is it Anthony? No. What is that kid's name? It's the guy, the young black boy who was involved in the stabbing of the white guys. And one of them ended up dying. It all happened at a football game.
mm.
Carmelo Anthony or something like
Oh,
that.
Carmelo Anthony. Okay, yeah, yeah.
I think that's his name. But that situation, when I saw some of the things that came up on the Shade Room, I believe, like
Mm,
they were like, I get the racist whites were doing their thing. They were already making this a race issue and whatnot. But this is a moment where we can, stand with this black boy as
mm,
well as just speak the facts and also shift the narrative in saying why we are doing certain things. The reason why Black people want to be here to support this kid is not because we believe that he's 100% innocent. Most
right.
people are supporting because we want the facts to come out. And from
Mm,
reports that were around the situation, people were saying that it seemed more like self-defense than anything. They're
mm-hmm,
not including any of those that information in some of the posts that they're putting out there. They're just going with the angle of right wing against black boy for self-defense and whatever, just to get that emotional trigger going. And now
right.
you have more people engaging with this under a false narrative and don't even know the full story, and they recognize and know that people are either too lazy or do not have the time to do a little bit of
Mm,
extra digging on the situation to gain more understanding, which I don't blame those people because I get it. I understand having an extremely busy life and I cannot go as far back as I want to really dive into a story sometime. Except for this Diddy trial, I was there for all of that. But like like not everybody can make the time to really do the digging. So we have to be more cognizant of how we push these narratives, especially when we know that we are a popular Black centered or Black focused media. And I have the same beef for the Breakfast Club too, but I'm not going into them right now
uh,
because I feel like we've said enough about them.
But yeah, but yeah, I mean, even when it comes to like the Shade Room, I mean, obviously the Shade Room is Black owned,
Mhm.
but it's one of those things where when we think about what the Shade Room attempts to do, right, it's very like user engagement, viral, like that kind of virality, right? Like if the Shade Room, pushes through like in real time. So it's not like, like your traditional media outlet. So I think that's one of the things that has always been interesting about the Shade Room, that they operate in that space. But like the amount of conversations like they have sprouted, especially when it comes to like colorism, like this like light skin versus dark skin, especially with especially with black and brown women. Like giving platforms to abusers, homophobes, misogynists. I mean,
Mhm.
let's just call it out, like Tory Lanez and the baby. Like again, I understand giving people a platform because you definitely want to hear all sides of when things happen. But there, to me, there is a difference between letting somebody, speak their piece on your platform versus like, okay, yeah, we're really kind of like amplifying, these people
Mhm.
and these messages. So yeah, I mean, obviously, Shade Room. I mean, there always has been like a lack of just like I don't even know, like, I don't know if you want to call it critical analysis or whatever you want to call it. But mainly, to me, they've always just operated on, yeah, let's just see what the vibes of this, situation or this topic is. Let's, get our numbers up, as much as we can. Let's repost. And when it comes to Black queer people, trans people, fat people, dark skinned people, just no,
Mhm.
it has not gone well. So, as the classic saying goes, I think the Shade Room is one of those things where it's like, yeah, it may be biased, but it's not isn't always for all of us. So yeah.
Mhm. A strong reminder that not all skin folk are kin folk.
Yeah, okay, folks, right. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And it's the lack of integrity that always gets me. And like I wish that there were more people out here who was willing to think and sit on what how some of this stuff implicates them, or how some of what they share or say or contribute to the types of conversations that they repost, how that may impact someone that they care about. I just wonder if people sat
Yeah.
in that a little bit more, will these places, these particular social media entities and bloggers and whatnot, will they still have as much leeway? Will they continue to
Yeah.
be spread as much? And on some level, I do feel like I have that answer because when I think about when it pretty much came out that the Shade Room is pretty much ran by a MAGA person, and there wasn't much change in their engagement after that. Granted,
Right.
I don't think that person is MAGA, but like same talking points.
Right. Yeah, and then I think it's not enough to just because I think we've gotten into this space where we get so excited, about, black owned things, like yeah,
Mhm.
let's have our black owned media, outlets and things like that. But I think that, we need to now be having conversations where no, yeah, I mean for the time that TMZ and, Shade Room and things like this were coming out, yeah, that was like the goal. But now we have to shift the conversation of it's not enough for just media to be black owned or popular. It has to be accountable. So like who are we centering? Who is
Mhm.
being harmed by the messages that, like we talk about or that we, have to highlight? What messages are actually being reinforced? As well. So, you can't just, and I feel like just with social media in general, like it's not enough, regardless if you are an influencer or if you're just, regular everyday person, everybody has some sort of accountability to what it is that you post, the things that you say, and the way that you engage online.
Mhm.
in a space. So, just a lot of internal reflecting, has to be done.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Other than them, this Diddy stuff.
Yeah, ooh, let's get into this. Ugh. You know what I am glad though, before we start off, I am so glad that we started off when we talked about this a few weeks ago. I'm glad that we talked about it from the angle that we did about like because remember when we talked about it, we didn't know, of course, like how, the trial was going to transpire, things like that. We were mainly like fact checking things like, hey, this
Mhm,
is what happened, this is what he's on trial for. We gave our 2 cents about it, but we really I don't think, from our last talk really like took a stance whether or not we thought he would be found guilty or not. And I like that we did that because not just because of the outcome of the trial, but I think that for us having the responsibility on our
mhm.
platform to not, go all the way in whether or not, we personally think somebody should be found guilty or not guilty or, what have you, but really just reporting on like what the overall nature of what this trial means and what it could and what it could do for the future.
Exactly.
So yeah, but yeah, I mean, pretty much we got the verdict this week, and I mean, yeah, this past week, and so yeah, I mean, just yeah, as you know, like him not being found guilty on the 3 major charges that were like, the racketeering conspiracy, the 2 counts of sex trafficking, but was found guilty on the nature of like transportation across like state lines for I don't want us to get docked on YouTube. So like I'm just gonna say usually workers of the night. Um, you know.
No, you can say
Um,
that. You can say it on YouTube.
okay, you can say it on YouTube. Okay, so let's just put it out there. State lines for prostitution. Let's just say that. Let's just say
Mhm,
that. So yeah, there's been a lot of, of course, public reaction, positive and negative. There's a lot of talk about why the prosecution's case weakened.
mhm.
Yeah, there's just so many ways to kind of like talk about the nature of this trial. So I just wanted to know like what was like your initial reaction to when the verdict came out?
I was I was happy that there was at least something that was found guilty. I was happy that he was going to spend some time in jail. And usually I'm not all for like putting people in jail, blah, 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 because there's a lot of people who are wrongly convicted, and I will never take that away from those who are. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't like the idea of jail being punishment rather than actual rehabilitation. But you have to work with what you got, and with what we got, I'm just like send that mofo to jail, and I'm okay with that. So
Yeah.
from that aspect, I was like, okay, cool. But there's also the invalidation of the experiences of the women here. And this was something that I mentioned the last time we talked about is that I don't know if they will even see the relationship thing, like a girlfriend or a wife being eligible to be sex trafficked, and how that in itself will be a major hurdle for people to move past. And I think that's the part of the reason why.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they did not find him guilty for that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I learned after the verdict was read and whatnot that the jury was made up of what was it? 8 men
Hey,
and
yeah.
4 women. And once I
Mm-hmm.
heard that, I was like, oh, okay, this makes so much sense. Like it, I got more confused by why they were trying to keep juror number 6, who happened to be a black man. And I'm just like, if anything, because no idea of what the leanings of this black man would have been, probably guilty or not guilty. There's
Mm-hmm.
still a full room of men that's there. Like replacing him with a white man would have been the best thing, anyways, because white men are not going to see the
Right.
trauma of black women as well as a black man might actually do if he's more on the feminist side. So
Right.
I'm like,
Yeah.
I would have been like, it doesn't, that part
Yeah.
just didn't make sense after hearing everything.
Uh, right. Now, the one thing I do want to clear up confusion of, like, because I'm not necessarily all that abreast with the law, but I can
Mhm.
like try to decipher the law as much as I can. And so, for anybody who has ultimately had the question of, because I did see this like reposted online a lot of people were asking, how can you not be guilty of sex trafficking, but you can be guilty of like prostitution, like transportation. And so, just
Mhm.
to kind of clear that up, sex trafficking is involuntary, so that means that, there was some obviously coercion, manipulation, abuse that is involved, whereas people who are in sex work are willing participants who typically require transport as part of services rendered. Now, again, that is just the legality of it. We're not
Mhm.
talking about like, I'm not talking about necessarily like what's morally right. I'm talking about from the eyes of the law. That is
Mhm.
that is like the distinction with that. So I just wanted to clear that up for
Yeah.
anybody who had a question.
It is an important clarity too. Clarification. And another thing that kind of hit home, and I also heard another YouTuber or content creator mention this, is that
Mm,
the men of the trial got justice where the women did not. Meaning
mm,
the male sex workers who Diddy hired and transported, their crime was understood. However, the crimes against Jane and Cassie were not. Even though there were indications that
mm,
Cassie as well as Jane Doe were forced to participate in these things, in that there was travel in the idea of coerciveness. There is that text message where Jane was told that, oh yeah, we can go ahead and celebrate this, or we can spend time together, blah 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 blah. And after she gets on the plane, she gets this text message saying, oh well, once you land, we're doing a free call. Like
mm,
that in itself is coercion, which I get some people may not understand that because we don't talk about consent enough in this country, which we could probably go into a little bit more. But
mm,
when you hear how she ends up getting there, um, you don't see the manipulation in that. Because we just see, oh well, she still, decided to participate in it. She could have gotten the flight home, blah blah blah. Like you think that is possible, but what we all know is that her only intentions of being there was to spend time with someone who she considered her man, that she wanted to spend intimate time with him and him alone. And
mm,
she learns mid-flight, oh, you have to be ready to put in work once you get here.
mm.
And
Yeah,
the jury, uh, unfortunately, did not see that. And this
yeah,
includes the women that was on the jury too.
yeah. And you see, that's the thing, because I ultimately try when I was thinking about this. I already kind of know like my personal feelings with this, so I tried to put myself in the mind frame of the jury. And to me, like if I'm doing that, I think because I would believe like there was this question online also was like, was the trial like an overreach in itself?
Mm-hmm.
And my feeling with that was not necessarily because like I have like, yes, the government pursuing a RICO charge. Yes, like the problem really wasn't the theory, it's the execution. So I'm gonna try to break this down because I had a lot of thoughts in my head about this. So government pursued a RICO case, which does in fact allow prosecutors to tie together older and newer acts if they can prove
Mm-hmm.
a pattern of criminal activity tied to an enterprise. When I first heard about this, I'm like, all right, so yeah, y'all again and again. I am not necessarily a Diddy fan, and that's why I try to look at both sides of this because again, I think if I was like a Diddy fan, I would probably have more bias. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm not. I never really cared one way or another about Diddy. He's just always been a figure. So really, I have no like really claim of liking or disliking him. But it's kind of like for me, the problem wasn't the theory, it was the execution. If you follow any type of law, or you even follow just TV media in general, for all of my TV shows I watch, or like even just cases in real life that you follow, RICO is notoriously hard to prove
Mm-hmm.
without airtight evidence that links all actions to a single criminal enterprise. In this case, the jurors seemingly obviously weren't convinced that Diddy ran such an operation rather than he's just this wealthy, yeah, obviously we can see the tapes, abusive man who engaged in morally disturbing but legally ambiguous activity. So to like go to like that question was this trial a little bit of an overreach? It's not an overreach to prosecute, but I think that it was a stretch to think that they could win a RICO without clear organizational proof. So because like when the whole RICO aspect came out, I'm like, RICO, like what are we doing? Because in my mind, I'm like, if we were just really concentrated on Cassie or concentrating on the other, people, who were stepping forward, yes. And so again, I can see why, you would want to pursue a RICO, but I'm just like, yeah, I don't know how that's gonna like turn out.
Mm-hmm.
And what ends up happening is that again, this was another big conversation that was happening. The why the prosecution's case weakened. Right. So of course we had like the jury was initially deadlocked on the racketeering charge before ultimately like acquitting.
Mm-hmm.
And so then we had a juror who was removed mid trial, which I think like a lot of legal people have spoken about this. They describe that as a significant loss to the defense, with indicating that, it was obviously going to be even more damaging to the prosecution strategy,
Mm-hmm.
right? So prosecutors in this case, they have to prove something that is a very high bar that, mm, you know, really was kind of muddled. Despite over 30 witnesses, we had former partners, employees, people obviously who were escorts, text messages that were read during that trial showing, or expressing sexual desire were used by the defense to argue consent.
Mm-hmm.
And we also have like this expert commentary noting, unfortunately, how coercive relationships often include expressions of desire. So again, I'm not saying that it's right. I'm just saying this is thinking from where they,
Mm-hmm.
defended this. It's really one of those things that like the reason why a lot of this case fell apart is that it became very kind of clear early on that the prosecution was not going to be able to prove racketeering or like sex trafficking charges, and I kind of felt that I would have been surprised if they did and be like, oh, okay, well, yeah, they did good, but in my heart of hearts, I'm like, yeah, this is not going to turn out the way
Yeah.
that y'all wanted to.
And I can agree with that because like that was even one of the charges I thought would have been hard for them to prove. I was hoping that they would have done the sex trafficking for Cassie and Jane, and I'm going to come back to that in a second. But the RICO aspect, like I get casting a broad net in order to see what can potentially land to find justice for victims in order for him to, be behind bars. But with the complexities of a RICO charge and having to like really, really dig as far into the weeds as possible to make it clear. And I don't think prosecution really painted things clearly to people throughout the case to show this is how that can be considered RICO. This is how that can be considered RICO. It's just it was a lot of information heavy. Well, in terms of the front loading, that I was even like, okay, hold up. What are
Mhm.
we doing here? And I think it was the strength of the defense as they continue to say he is not on trial for domestic violence, which he's not.
Right.
And a very brilliant move of defense to be like, yes, our client is a bad person, very bad, very in fact, he got videos that he's abusive. But did he drug these women? Did he force them into having these like so we're going to use did he force these women to participate in these freak offs, knowing that we already admitted that he's an
So that's the thing. Like, let's talk about that as well, because I think that that's another part of this case that has a lot of people up in arms. Like this question about like are freak offs like considered a crime? And I'm like, this from my perspective, like no, but they can become criminal depending on how we've been talking about consent, right? If all parties are consenting adults, freak offs are just not like it's just another term if you were saying like a group like orgy
Mhm.
or a sex party, like that's not criminal. You know,
That's
if we're thinking about coercion, trafficking, or if someone is obviously coerced or drugged or underaged or trafficked, then yes, that becomes criminal, especially under federal statuses. Recording
mhm.
and distributing without people's consent, like secretly taping, not considered that violates, state and federal laws like we have now, like with revenge porn,
Mhm.
and things like that. So yeah, freak offs, and like in my opinion, if I'm thinking about this legally, like freak offs aren't illegal per se, but they often, they sit on that very like slippery slope, legal
Mhm.
slippery slope, if anything is coercive or exploitative. And that's really what this case was trying to like get at. And I think that the jury, they just weren't feeling it. And I remember I was seeing a comment that was saying like, well, a crime is, a crime, whether or not, charges, can be filed or not. And, like this person was saying that, like he wasn't, paying hotel staff to destroy, evidence, and like he wasn't charged after the tape, because of the statute of limitations. Because if it wasn't for the statute of limitations, like the California state or feds would have like thrown the whole book at him, and just things like that. And I was like, it was a very interesting comment that had me thinking of like, okay, like certain parts of that are true. Like when it comes to the statute of limitations, yes, prosecutors can try to use like a RICO as a way to revive older crimes, but but they have to bundle them into a pattern of criminal activity again.
Mhm.
So, this whole, and even still, we know that, allegedly paying off hotel staff to destroy tapes could, be seen as obstruction, bribery, evidence tampering, all of that. To me, where that person was coming from, and again, I get the emotions of it, but part of that comment kind of fell apart because saying a crime is a crime, whether charges are filed or not, philosophically, yes, but legally,
Mhm.
crimes must be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. No conviction equals no legal guilt. And so that distinction matters deeply in court. Again, I'm just thinking, coming at this from the legal perspective. Yes,
Mhm.
we know people commit crimes every single day and do not get, arrested or get charged and stuff like that for it. So yeah, in a way, yeah, philosophically, yes, a crime is a
Mhm.
crime, but legally, that is not true. The whole thing about the tape proved trafficking by force, like that's like, but does it? Like it shows like the showing or distributing like content, but what a court requires is
Mhm.
the fact that evidence the act wasn't consensual. They need to have clear linkage to force, fraud, or coercion. And they also need proof that Diddy orchestrated it, knowing, if not knowingly and repeatedly. And so in this case, regardless if you think it's wrong or right, in this case, the jury just was not convinced that standard was met,
Mhm.
even with the tape.
Right.
So it's like again, I think that this really comes down to because a lot of people who were thinking that yeah he was gonna get the book thrown at him and things like that, which he could still face very much several years in prison because of the things that were he was found on. But yeah, there were a lot of things that as they kept happening, I'm like yeah boo, I'm like yeah y'all screwed.
Yeah. Yeah. It's Crazy, crazy situation to be in. And just, it's a lot.
Now, now, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So I was just gonna backtrack to the sex trafficking thing,
Mm,
because like the voice of the people, the broader community, black, others, predominantly black, because this is a black person on trial, and black people came out. The voices of the people saying that, um, see, didn't do anything wrong when it came to Cassie. Diddy didn't do anything wrong when it came to
mhm,
Jane Doe. Um, uh, that's what y'all get and all this other stuff. And even when it
mm,
came to the civil case, when they're just like, see, Cassie just wanted the money. See, Diddy didn't do anything wrong here. She just wanted the money. What I need the thing that people are not understanding is how the legal system work in these types of cases. First and foremost, the reason why most victims of sexual assault, sexual violence in general, do not come up as often for criminal things is because and I don't say this to discourage any person from doing their reportings. I will always tell people, if you feel the need to do so, report, 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 because at least that can start building a case for whoever that person may be who assaulted the person. But the likelihood of someone being convicted and sent to jail for sexual violence of any of those cases is 2%. So
mm,
you have a 2% chance of gaining justice through the criminal justice system for a criminal trial related to sexual assault or rape
mm,
versus
mm,
the the civil route where yeah, you may get paid, but that getting those funds, especially in smaller cases, um, is not going to take away the trauma that that person experienced. It's not going to right their life, or however that trauma may have impacted them. It's not going to really make that huge of a difference from them because they still have to live with knowing that they're not going to get criminal justice, right?
mm,
So many victims of sexual violence have to go that civil route in order for them to get some inkling of representation or validation that they've experienced something. Um,
yeah.
that's why Diddy settled out of court for such a large amount, because regardless if he would have gone to court or not, Cassie was going to get
Mm,
paid. Cassie was
mhm,
going to be found seen as a victim, and uh, Diddy would have likely been shown guilty in that case, regardless of how we may want to perceive it. However, as we see, when she is the one of the primary victims of the sex trafficking in the criminal trial, she did not get justice there.
mm.
Like it unfortunately aligns that way for so many people.
Right. And also here's another part of this conversation, because I was seeing a lot of this rhetoric online that not necessarily agreeing with obviously the nature of what Diddy has done, but it made me, especially with tying back to the whole Cassie aspect, it just immediately what I thought about is, see, this is the reason why we have such a capitalist society. So I'm gonna link back to that in a moment,
Mhm.
because I was seeing a lot of people who said that, okay, but let's talk about the fact that you had a number of witnesses who got on that stand and said that they were, of course, under social or, financial pressure, but they benefited from some way in
Mhm.
being involved with Diddy or these freak offs. And so that in nature almost like reframes the conversation, because you have argument that if adults consented, even under social or financial pressure, and received some form of compensation or benefit, then it shouldn't be framed as trafficking, especially if they're if like obviously these people have regret now and that regret is being used as legal leverage. So I thought that was an interesting kind of point of view, and I kind of want to break that down a little bit because in some ways, again, this may be a non-popular opinion, but I see the kind of aspect of that because again, consent is one of those things that's complicated but not always absent. Again,
Hmm.
many of the witnesses said, did consent to sex and party participation at the time, even if they later regretted it. And to me, the way that I look at it from like a legalist, sort of view, not a moral sort of view, because let me be very clear. I have this whole thing about cheating as well. Like when I'm watching TV and things like that, I always say cheating is immoral. It's not illegal. So when we jump, mind frames, that's really gets me. So in this kind of case, regret does not necessarily equal coercion. Coercion obviously has to involve some sort of force, fraud, clear manipulation, but not just manipulation via like your status or your wealth or something. So it's to say if someone freely accepts money, housing, gifts, career connections, whatever that is for sexual intimacy, it may be exploitative morally, but that is not what you can prove as far as legal trafficking. And so
Hmm.
the reason why I connected that back to the nature of capitalism is because pretty much that's what we do. Our
Hmm.
entire culture normalizes exchanging beauty, desirability, sex appeal for access and opportunity, right? If we think about celeb culture, influence, marketing, all these sorts of aspects, and capitalism innately encourages selling yourself, your labor, your image, your intimacy, so it's to say, if the deal was made and both parties benefited, asking the question, is it still criminal just because it was ugly or because you now regret it? So yes, it does. Yes, we can have a conversation about the inequity of power because Diddy is a larger than life figure, right?
Hmm.
Cassie's case, for instance, even if and I'm glad that you brought that up because even in Cassie's case, for instance, even if she settled, a lot of people still see the violent allegations, not just the freak off participation as obviously non-consensual, and that's a key difference,
Hmm.
right? So, having this conversation in like money doesn't always equal like what we think of as full autonomy. Saying someone was paid doesn't erase, that broader, I don't know what I want to call it, like economic, vulnerability, especially for women, especially
Hmm.
for Black, brown people, queer people, So again, it's asking that question. While you may be able to get something tangible, money, opportunity, whatever it is, were they really in a position to say no? And that's where we get into the whole law versus moral kind of critique. Cassie
Hmm.
took, if we think about it, Cassie took her settlement, and that's what people do in civil suits, especially when one, we know the court system is slow. The court system can be re-traumatizing, and it's
Hmm.
built on deals. It doesn't prove truth or falsity. It's about what number do I want to put on the nature of my pain,
Hmm.
right? So people got paid for sex or for favors. That's literally how capitalist exchanges work, right? So again, regret is not a crime. If you're in this space of feeling regret or shame or this public narrative, that's how the narrative like gets shaped. So again, I just wanted to highlight that that's like another part of the conversation where people are having where it's like, no, I don't necessarily rock with Diddy, but I also don't want like they also don't want necessarily everybody, people to feel like everybody who got on that stand, because they're expressing regret or, shame or
Hmm.
things like this, that somehow that also equals like that equals coercion and things like that. Because ultimately you said yes, and somehow you also still benefited or were compensated in some kind of way
Hmm.
for what it is that happened. So just because you have regret, that doesn't mean you were coerced into it.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you brought up the capitalism side of things because it reminds me of something from my research where when it comes to people who are victims of sex trafficking or even people who are considered
Mm,
prostitutes, if they ever stand trial or even if they were to report
mm,
things to the police, people do not see prostitution or a person being sex trafficked as a victim or capable of claiming victimhood from sexual assault at all because it's the compensation piece. You were paid, you are the service. And because you are the service, you have no rights to say no. And because of that belief, it makes it even harder for people who are being sex trafficked or even people within
right.
relationships to be able to have someone in their corner to confirm like no this was sexual assault that this is something that's supposed to be tried this is a space where you deserve justice, right? But when it's normalized that you are the service and you just have to deal with whatever hand is dealt to you and it erases their victimhood and their
Mm.
ability to claim that for themselves. And there was something else I wanted to say, but my brain did the thing. But
No, it's
yeah.
no, but yeah, it's just a very um unfortunate situation in a lot of in a lot of ways. Um, and I think that what I can when because like I said, when I thought about the whole capitalist aspect, it especially when trials like this are public and it's gaining all this media attention and narrative, but it really does ask the question like if you choose a transaction under power imbalance and benefited
Mhm.
from it. Mm, need I say more? Or can you later call it coercion if the imbalance made you uncomfortable in retrospect?
Mhm. Oh,
You know.
now I remember. A thought experiment that I had a few times with some of my legal friends is what would change within our law
Mm,
if we had a standard definition for consent, and what that means and how that will have a trickle
mm,
impact in everything that we do. Because as of right now, we don't have to abide by informed consent or consent in general like terms of
mm,
services, it's not a requirement that you understand what you're agreeing to.
mm,
It's just whether or not you want to utilize the service. There, in that in itself is a small way where coercion takes place in our society, where you want to have access to this tool, but in order for you to have access, you have to agree with all aspects of the terms and service agreement before you can do anything on it, rather than having the right to say, no, I don't agree to all of these, and still having
mm.
access to utilize those certain platforms. Um,
Yeah.
I've just been so curious about if we were to have a lot more like a legal standard for consent and how that applies to these different policies. How will that change our society? And how would that change the conversations and how we approach these kinds of conversations when it comes to coerciveness and sexual assault and all of that in such a Diddy trial, or even like, yeah, we'll have HR departments in our workplace and they'll have a definition for consent and all of that. And we have to maneuver things based off of those agreements.
Right.
What happens
Yeah.
once that becomes the broader community? And now we're a
Exactly.
society who has to abide by this definition of consent and how
Yeah.
we purchase vehicles, which is a very coercive practice in itself. Sales is very coercive. Uh, so it's like, what changes when we
Yeah.
make that the forefront?
Yeah, and at the end, because I think for any definitions that we come up with, it's like anything of the law, like you find a way to skirt around it. That's literally that's why the law is something that is always open for interpretation, and that's what gets on my nerves so much about the law. But it's kind of like literature. It also that's what makes it also like intriguing. And I just think that for the nature of this trial, like, cause somebody was like this last thing I'll say about the trial was like It's kind of like, oh, should the prosecution kind of be embarrassed about the fact like they lost like their major franchise? And like for me, I kind of say like yes and no. I think yes because they brought serious federal charges. Like I say again, RICO and sex trafficking. That is like a big swing. And like you're a failure to secure like the conviction on damning that's a big swing and a miss moment for any prosecutor.
Mhm.
Now, no, also because Diddy was found guilty, on, like two man act count. So I mean, that's not nothing. And it does, establish criminal liability, of course. So that's not nothing. But in when you sell like a high public profile case and you got like bombshell video evidence, and you got multiple, corroborating witnesses, you got all these explosive headlines, and you still walk away with no like racketeering or trafficking convictions, like that's like a credibility hit. So,
Right.
mm. But we shall see what the aftermath brings in light of, the things that have happened. But in other lights of things that have been happening, I love the fact that we're going to talk about another particular case of misuse of uh, intimacy and, kind of sex work. So this was actually something done back in June. Um, so to talk about a little bit about what happened with the content creator Austin Wolf. A lot of people, if you follow online content creation, Austin Wolf is a adult performer who has been, in the game for quite some time. And back, pretty much around June 20th, I want to say, in Manhattan, he pleaded guilty to a single felony count of enticement of a minor to engage in sexual activity. He admitted in late 2023, early 2024, somewhere around that time, he did induce a 15-year-old to perform a sex act via the phone and social media. And so the plea was a part of that deal. So as I understood, federal prosecutors agreed to drop two separate child pornography charges in exchange for, his guilty plea. And so, he has to, face his sentencing and things like that. But, to kind of talk about this broader culture that's happening around, um, we've come from a time where it was fetishized about, being with younger guys, younger youth, and, things like that. And again, we can maybe classify that as even like what we call twink culture or, things like that. But somewhere along the line, I think that social media, along with a lot of other factors, we've gotten into very dangerous territory
Mhm.
um, in going after or sexualizing or eroticizing boys who appear underage, i.e., like they look like they're 14, 15 years old. And so, while in this case, he may not, be openly, like claiming that, like, oh, he likes boys of this, look or this stature, things like that. It's contributing to this, contributing to this normalization of pedophilia, pedophilia desires under the guise, I think, of gay, kind of twink culture. And,
Mhm.
rather than, this living in harmless, like this harmless fantasy aspect, this is a very dangerous blurring of lines that, I think that what we're seeing with a kind of like youth fetishization. So just want to get like obviously like your take. Like, did you know anything about the Austin Wolf case before we, talking about it here? And just what's been like your take on like this line that we've been blurring like over the years between like this twink fetishization and then like, okay, yeah, this is actually like very problematic.
So you said Austin Wolf, yeah. Him, I honestly did not know anything until you brought it up to, and brought it to my
Mm,
attention about this going on because,
mm.
I don't be watching and paying any attention to white men like that. I just don't, nothing towards white people in general. Like, I just don't be focusing on that side of things as much. Every now and again, when it comes across the feed, I'm like, okay, that's what we're doing. If it's not political
Mm,
related and it's impacting all of us, I don't know what y'all got going on over there, right? But love you,
mm,
love you down. But when it comes to this barely legal stuff, like I approach this in two separate ways. As a person of being a strong supporter of CNC, consensual non-consent play, and
mm.
the age play that can be associated with
Right.
that, I'm all for it. Having videos for that, okay, cool. Having the barely legal um, category.
Mm.
So long as everybody is actually legal enough age, no issue with that being there. Now,
Mhm,
that's me in just showing genuine support for it because it's not something that I'm into, but for those who love it, great for y'all.
mhm,
Now, is there a part that that does trigger me a little bit? Yes, because I want people who are fascinated and fetishized about these kind of connections to
mhm,
really do some deep digging behind why. And once you understand the why and you have comfort in that,
mhm,
I have no other concerns for you. Um, because there are those who are fascinated by that because they believe they are getting away with something, right?
mhm.
And those individuals is where we have a problem.
Right. Yeah.
This is where the conversation of where that fetish becomes more connected to the creepy side of things and the illegal side of things that keeps me worried
Mhm,
about the safety of youth as well as the longevity of this type of category and whether or not it
mhm.
still needs to exist beyond that. Um,
Right. Yeah, and that's the thing. And I don't want, and the purpose for talking about this is not in any way to even say, not the fact that we were even thinking it, but I don't want it to be like a conversation where it's like, oh, okay, we bring up Austin Wolf and this was a case of like obviously pedophilia and things like that to make it seem like, oh, there is something innately wrong with twink culture, like obviously twink
mhm,
fantasy and twink culture. Absolutely not. No, absolutely not. We're bringing up this topic to really discuss about again where those lines in particular about being blurred, and just for our audience who may be listening to us who's not familiar with like these terms, like twink was is a term that was kind of coined in more so white Eurocentric gay culture to describe young men who are physically like slim, they're young looking but still adult men, often white, they're hairless, effeminate in some ways. And so while twink has always served as like this label of like identity, rebellion, kind of like classifying in like these sexual categorization within queer spaces, with the rise of like TikTok and OnlyFans and Twitter and just all these things, again the line between I think twink and this boy fetish aspect has increasingly grown blurry because we have algorithms that reward content that is provocative, it's visually
mhm,
striking. We have adult creators who lean into the taboo aesthetics to attract clicks and stand out, you
mhm,
know, and also the desire, right? Yeah, what was once, because a lot of times when we talk about, these fetishizations and things like that, before we had social media, this would just be talked about like in circles and spaces, like, but now everything is public now, you know. So when we talk, twin culture, often moves into the territory where, yeah, performers are, you know, made to look underage, not
mhm,
just young looking, but childlike, naive, helpless, like
mhm,
those, that kind of aspect. But when this becomes like eroticized now, and it's very much opening the door to very dangerous implications about youth, consent, power, all those things. That's where these kind of aspects stand. And the way in which I see about this tying back, especially like to Black culture, like, and I'm again, as we speak about Black culture, we're talking about, just in general, not specific, because we know Black culture is very multifaceted.
Hmm.
I think about like the cultural weight of like this like adultification that we typically have like with Black teenage boys, right? So, like Black boys, in a lot of spaces are very much seen as like not innocent.
Hmm.
We're very much seen as more dangerous. And so this makes any discourse around age and sexuality more charged, right? A 15-year-old boy is rarely seen as like a Black 15-year-old boy is rarely seen as like desirable in the same way like a 15-year-old white presenting boy is fetishized, right?
Hmm.
So while white boys are being fetishized, we can be, and of course, it doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. Of course, we know terrible things, of course, like that happen. But, in just talking about teenage boys in general, we're more seen as being criminal,
Hmm.
threatening, and by a certain point, we're already sexualized by default, you know. And then when you add the aspect of, I'm not even going to get into the whole church aspect. We know that that's a place where, in a community where a lot of problematic, things happen. And, so I'm not even going to get into that. But, I just think that, again, going back to what we talked about earlier with the whole TMZ and the shade room, we have to continue to get to places where we talk about what accountability has to be taken, you know. Um, we, yeah,
Hmm.
that just yeah. I
And
lost my train of thought, but yeah, that's what I had.
something I kind of wanted to double back on as it relates to the barely legal, well, not necessarily barely legal side of things, but the fetishization of youth aspects
Mm,
is this trend that I'm seeing with including in the caption of
yeah,
black porn, right? Especially
yeah,
on Twitter. And for anybody who doesn't know what YN means, it's just young nigga, okay? Cool. But but it's the utilization of that is highlighting that, oh, I'm out here hooking up with someone that's younger than me. This is a person that you will just perceive just based off of the what YN culture is, or what you may see outside of just the porn aspect. YN is just people who will be the younger legal Generation Z kids, sorry, young adults, like between, the college age, young adults right now, 18, 22,
mhm,
probably going up to
right.
24-ish.
Mm,
These are the YNs. And with the inclusion of that, it's in a way fetishizing them in a new way, where
mm,
rather than I'm just like, even when I was younger, like before I even started college and I was watching, the porny things, and on my phone, okay, doing grown things. I would go to the college sections. I will go and look at what the Black college threads on what is that not Pornhub. I didn't use it then. I think it was GayTube that I used to use. I will search Black college so I can, see the engagement, of people around my age and all that doing the things and whatnot.
mm,
Um, YN is kind of that replacement of the college age porn that I would have looked at when I was a younger age. But the way that it's used now is like every single trade like guy, or every single younger guy, or hood nigga is considered a YN to
mm,
to I guess, romanticize or make it a little bit more intense that, oh, I'm dealing with somebody that's younger than me and
Hmm.
I'm blowing their back out or they're blowing my back out and all this other stuff. And it carries it continues to carry that weight of the porn category that just made me uncomfortable. Like even
Yeah.
when I was in my teens and I would see barely legal straight or gay, I would just be
Mm.
like, I don't like this. This is
Right. Yeah.
making me uncomfortable, and I'm supposed to be of the age of these people. However,
Mm.
when I recognize that, oh, this is a person that's in college, they're college age, they're a little bit more
Mm.
adult in this, like going back,
Mm.
it's wild that I thought that. But it was a little bit more comfortable to engage in that content versus the barely legal because the college seemed more willing and the barely legal seemed so much more exploitative. And then the age gaps were a lot more noticeable
Hmm.
in the barely legal category than the I'm
Right.
going out finding Ebony College.
Right. And you see, and even with this incident that happened with Austin Wolf, because when I was first like discovering, like porn and things like that, I started off actually watching like white, creators and stuff, because that was what was more so like showcasing advertised. I do a little bit more searching to find like, our people, which I'm glad I did. But it like Austin Wolf is one of those people like I didn't watch like faithfully, but like I ran across like some of his videos, every now and then. And I think what happened, particularly with him over the years, is that yeah, you would see where it's like, okay, yeah, he has like a thing for like younger men because like he's like this like 6 foot something, like buff, kind of white guy, with the beard and things like that. I guess you would consider it to be like conventionally attractive. I don't know.
Mhm.
But you would see him in some of these scenes with like these like young guys. And it wasn't just like young guys, but again, going into like this whole twink aspect where it's like, okay, well, maybe he, does that because that's like what gets him more views or, something like that. But
Mhm.
then something odd started happening because for me, it was kind of like anytime now I would see him as we got into like the social, really like big social media era, it was kind of like anytime I would see him, it wouldn't just be like, oh, like a video here, a video there. It was kind of like most of his content, at least from what I was seeing, not to say that that's not true, but most of the things that I was seeing when it coming across him was like, no, it's like almost everything that he is doing has something to do with like younger looking, men or, like these twink,
Mhm.
categorized men. So when the story came out about like him admitting, to, this very inappropriateness with a minor, I'm like, okay, well, yeah, I mean, like that wasn't one of those things where it's like, oh my God, like shock, you know. Um, I was like, okay, that actually, when I think about it, that actually kind of makes sense. Um, but yeah, it's kind of like, these conversations, right? Just like how we were thinking about earlier, it's like this at the heart of these conversations is not just about like, obviously we know that anytime inappropriateness with a minor is illegal. But it's also really about who benefits
Mhm.
when younger looking boys are eroticized, right? And who gets harmed by it,
Mhm.
right? Because you have a lot of people that when this case with him come out, with a lot of people whose cases have come out, it's like, and you still have people continuously engaging this. And like, something of a thumbnail that I sent you was like somebody was asking, how do y'all even like get aroused by looking at somebody engage with somebody who looks like they're 15 years old?
Hey.
Like I'm like that, like just, and a lot of people were commenting in that thread. It's like, yeah, I'm really not understanding. Like, what are we normalizing? In the, in online spaces like this. Like, no, no.
No, I agree with that wholeheartedly, and that's the thing that is the creep factor for me. The thing that always made it very uncomfortable to even think about the barely legal stuff because, um, and this is also why I asked the question of exploring the why.
Mm,
Because if it's one of those, oh, it's a thing about domination, and I do like the way the aesthetic of me dominating on a smaller frame person, the twink type or whatever. But the age in itself doesn't matter. Well,
mm,
legal age. Listen, like you can be with a 40-year-old twink bodied person. Cool, get
mm,
it. I understand. That makes a lot more sense to me. But
right.
when it's I'm finding these people in this particular type of grouping of people vastly attractive, and I want to pursue those things, and I want to continue to follow that train this
Mm,
way, that train that you're following may be a red flag, and you might want to seek out proper therapy to unpack some of the things that's going on in your life. Be
right.
it a traumatic experience, or that this may be an unhealthy relationship type that is not best for you. And it
Mm,
can easily lead you towards breaking the law.
yeah,
And
exactly.
I'd rather there be less children harmed than any.
Exactly. Exactly. So yeah, we'll have to wait to see what happens with that. But yeah, it's a very interesting thing to unfold. But since we've had so much around like, public media and these, uh aspects that have been, just really, or we'll talk about something that we kind of wanted to end on tonight as a final conversation is there was an interesting post about different definitions of various kinds of sex in theory and practice. So one, and we would love for anybody that's listening or that's watching us to kind of chime in absolutely to the conversation that this stems from. So it was asking the question of what is like your definitions or like what you believe in practice of what you consider to be kinky sex. What is obviously, what is something that you figure is perverse sex? What is something that you consider to be raunchy sex? And then what is something that is taboo? Now, all four of those terms can, of course, be like defined on their own, and they can also, kind of obviously have a lot of overlap to them.
Mhm.
And again, the way that I was thinking about them was not necessarily just in definition, but like, of course, in practice as well. So like when I think about the definition of like kink, right? I think about anything that is considered, anything that deviates from what is considered the norm or even what society views as vanilla, which is always why it's always complicated to define because like what is vanilla to one person is not vanilla to the next person. So if I'm thinking even just about the nature of like BDSM in general, for any people who don't know what BDSM stands for, it is for bondage, discipline, dominance or submission, and sadomasochism. That, when we think about role play, sensation play, power exchange, all this type of stuff, it's the idea of consent, boundaries, intentional play. And of course, kink doesn't always even involve sex. It's more so about power dynamics. So when I think about kinky sex, my mind doesn't always just go to the sex aspect. I really think about, okay, how are we having exchanges of power? you know so like what is like maybe like your insight or your definition into like what you consider to be kinky sex.
Oh, we're just gonna start with kinky first. Okay, cool. That works for me. All right, so
Mhm.
uh similar to what you mentioned, I consider kinky sex to be any type of because I'm a sensory person anyway, any type of sexual play that engages the senses and sexual activity that goes outside of what is
Mhm.
broadly known as the societal norms. So
Right.
any type of sensual play that goes beyond just vaginal, anal, and
Mhm.
penile focused play,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
oh, and also oral. And once it goes beyond that, now we're in the kinky range.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And now when I was thinking also about perverse. Perverse is something I had to really stop and really think about because when I thought about perverse, immediately my mind went to just like how we talked about like anything that is, involving minors or anything like that. So I thought about perverse, but the more I continued to think about it, I thought of like perverse as something like as more of like a judgmental term that's
Hmm.
used a lot of times like by psychologists or psychiatrists, to describe something that is abnormal or deviant or wrong because it exists within like this moral framing. So like anything that is marked outside the boundaries that has something to do about like a pathology, that's going on. So when I think about like something that's perverse, I think of something that is like shameful, like it's deviant, like it's kind of like sick in the mind. Um, so as I think about, perverse, um, but like I say, it's something that again, what is deviant to you is not deviant to the next person, right? So you could I mean, there's a obviously a whole lot of people in the world who think that homosexuality in itself is perverse, that sex toys in themselves are perverse,
Hmm.
and things like that. So again, there is we're not talking about this to say like there's just one definition or, one frame of mind and thinking about, these kind of terms. But when I think about perverse, and I especially think about it in like a, you know, black, kind of like queer context, the nature of our sexuality has always been deemed perverse, as black folks in general. We've always been seen as deviant from like obviously the slave breeding, tumultuous history that we come from, and things like that. But yeah, like what are some of your thoughts about when you hear like the term like perverse? Like what does that like signify for you?
Hmm. I agree. There's the immediate thought is something that is being judged. Like there is that rooted understanding that this is not appropriate. This is
Mm,
something that's not acceptable. In terms of like definition for perverse sex, I will define that as any sexual contact or activity that either interrupts, disrupts, or does not
mm,
include consent
mm,
at all stages of the activity. That's when
mm,
things will be perverse. To go,
mm.
do a quick little callback. Some of those freak offs, perverse. The vast majority of those, probably not. The way that they started, not perverse at all. Shoot, in
Mm.
definition, I was at a freak off before. Like literally, there was this one person who had this oil thing, and they were just putting oil everywhere, and it got on me, and I was like, "Oh my God, this is no." So
No.
I made it to a freak off. And outside of the room, it was red. Look at that. Oh, let me stop. Let me stop. I was not at a Diddy freak off. Y'all are not going to start that about me. Uh, but yeah, so that's how I would at least define
Okay.
perverse in that way.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, and then when I think about raunchy, so I had to really go back and forth between what I thought about raunchy and taboo because like when I think about raunchy, I initially think about like raunchy to me like focuses on like the performance, like what
Hmm.
we do like obviously during sex. So it's about the spectacle of it. So, I can think of things like, like if you're loud during sex, like if
Hmm.
it happens to get messy or, like things like that, like, when we have these quote unquote terms like, oh yeah, like you're like, oh yeah, I was a real slut last night.
What's that?
You like, so that's what I kind of think about when I think about like raunchy. I think about like something that is it's legal, but it's like still kind of like more like judged morally in a
Hmm.
bit. It's more like leaning towards like, yeah, like I'm liberated. Like, yeah, I can be as loud as I want. Like I can be as loud as I want to, things like that. And yeah, even just like our history of how like what we consider to be raunchy. Because I will say, I think that we see more of that obviously with the black women in
Mm,
spaces, especially like our black women who happen to be rappers. So like when we think about like Lil Kim, Cardi B, Megan Thee Stallion, right? These are women who often face double the punishment because they're celebrated for their sexiness or their boldness that is considered to be raunchy, for
mhm.
like their lyrics that they talk about. And we've had an episode about that where we're like, yeah, so why are we getting upset because women are saying like what men have said in their rap songs since the dawn of time? Like,
Right, right.
so to me, raunchy is more so about excess. It's about you like having like this shamelessness,
Mhm.
to an aesthetic,
Yeah.
and performance, or something like that. So what about you? How do you look at the nature of something raunchy?
I definitely don't have like a clear-cut definition like I would with the other words, but it's
Mm-hmm.
all in the description. It is the smells of
Mm-hmm.
the room. It is the sweat that comes on after the encounter. Like for me, a raunchy sexual experience is anything that help gets me to tap into my old religious trauma, where I'm walking away from this sexual experience saying, you know what? Maybe I do need to go to church. Maybe I am a sinner. Maybe I did something wrong last night that I need to ask for forgiveness from God because what we just did
Yeah.
was a little bit, it took me somewhere. Let me go pray on this a little bit. If you bring me there, we had raunchy sex. That's we
Yeah.
did the things. Somebody
Hey,
got cut it out.
yes. And I'm all for reframing conversations. I'm like, listen, raunchy, is not dirty. Like, I will not apologize for what my body does, what it wants, how loud it gets. Like, listen, I'm not making no apologies.
Not a one. We'll be having
Not
another
a
one of these.
one.
Can
Not
we?
a one. Yeah. And then I think just lastly, like tackling like this whole aspect of taboo. So like when I think about taboo, I think about like again how we were talking about the nature of fetishization earlier. So when I think about taboo, I think about like acts or like fantasies that are societal taboos. So like if
Mhm,
you will when we think about like incest or age play or like if you're thinking about like a religious priest dynamic or bestiality or something like that. So the for me the focus on taboo is more so like on transgression, right? It's
mhm,
still it doesn't make it illegal. It's just like it violates some sort of like cultural norm. So it plays this line between like, oh, this is dangerous, but it's also a little bit hot as
mhm,
well. So like when I think about taboo, I don't know. It's something about the nature of something being taboo that I don't know. It's something that like invokes, I don't know, like the like
mhm,
fear, fascination, maybe a little disgust all at the same time. So like for instance, like again, like if we were to go like to the nature of role play and like you were having like some sort of like like incestual, aspect of role play. Again, this is role play, so this is not something that you're acting out, of course, like in your real life. But this is something that hey, maybe you just wanted to do, or you're doing something age play, you're not obviously involving actual minors, of course. But this is
mhm,
something like maybe you just have a fantasy of youth or, something like that. Those kind of things, are considered to be, like taboo. So and even as I think about like yeah, for like public figures, who like use like very sexual taboos like in their work. If I think about like film, like Marlon Riggs, for instance, definitely has a lot of sexual taboos. James Baldwin, for the literary great that he is, James Baldwin has a lot of things that he talks about in his work that are like sexual taboos.
mhm.
Um, so yeah, I think, taboos are an interesting uh aspect where we're looking when we look at something as like a taboo, it's like what do we consider this aspect to be like culturally how we look at this. It
Mm.
can be something culturally forbidden or like morally fraught.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I,
what
I'm
about
on, I'm on the same boat as you with that. I do feel like taboo is doing the illegal, making the illegal thing legal in a
you?
very fun and sexy and uh, of course, consensual way, and also
Mm,
going against the fullest of the grain of the societal norms. It's going that extra step beyond what
mm.
kink will be.
Right.
And bring that into your reality. Like you said, engaging in the age play, even the race play of it all. Like,
Hmm.
really finding a way to um, make the hot button conversation something that you get to thrive in. Like even let's say, like I made that joke about the freak off situation. Um,
Mm,
that let's say if we lived in a world where all those aspects connected were not socially acceptable, then that would be something that leans into the taboo because you're making that possible. You're inviting and creating the stage where all of this wonder gets to be something that we get to
mm.
truly thrive in for a moment.
Yeah.
I've said it before and I say it again. If I'm in a relationship with somebody long term, I'm completely open with them pimping me out for like once every blue moon, meaning
Mm.
they just have couple. Now I don't want to say friends because I don't want the whoever you out there to be like he looking at my friends. No, I'm not. But be like, hey, babe,
Yeah.
want to do something special? I have like 15 people who kind of want to come over. How you feel about that? And I'll be like,
Hmm.
15? Can we pull
Right.
that back a little bit or go off 15? Who knows how I feel that day?
Exactly, exactly. And then and again, just to contextualize, I think like the when we talk about like examples, right? When
Mhm.
we think about like differences between something being taboo and something being perverse, like again, something that is taboo is like, okay, if I was engaged with somebody and I'm pretending to be like a priest and we're having like a consensual role play fantasy in the bed,
Yes,
in the bedroom. That's a transgressive fantasy.
it is.
Perversion is if I was a real priest exploiting someone during confession, that is a power in real life perversion. So that
Amen.
is not to make no mistake about that. So I think it's great to just again like come across these things where it's like yeah we can talk about them like from a theory standpoint and like how they like play out in practice.
I agree.
You
I
know?
agree. And that's
So.
actually a beautiful way of showing the difference between the perverse and the taboo. And I've seen somebody do age play and had it based in the Catholic Church, and it was very fascinating to watch. And it
Mm,
was so good. Like,
mm,
the play was
yeah.
phenomenal. But
Absolutely.
the power dynamics didn't necessarily exist. But that was the point of the CNC scene is we create the the power dynamic in how we converse about the scene. We establish the roles and we know what's going to happen, and you make the things happen, and it's beautiful. Uh,
Hmm.
but
Yep. So yeah, definitely interesting to delve into like, definitions, theory, practice, those kind of things. So hopefully, obviously we'll probably have some more definitions to discuss at some point in the near future. But
yeah.
yeah, anything else that was on your radar to talk about?
Nope, nope, not for me. How about
Yeah,
you?
not for me. So yeah, I think that we have come to a close for this evening.
Yes, yes, yes. So thank you all so much for tuning in to Melanin and Moonlight, your late night space for deep, thought-provoking conversations about sex, culture, and the well-being of the Black community. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the podcast to keep the conversation going. Until next time, keep the vibes flowing and your mind open. Bye.
Bye.